Coming up on All About Android, it's me, Jason Howell. We've got Ron Richards, TWiT DAO, and our special guest. We're so thrilled to have him, Chet Haase from Google, author of Androids, the book that focuses on the team that built the Android operating system. So we've got a little bit longer of an episode. We spend the first portion of the episode talking with Chet about Google behind the scenes. Specifically, we spend some time tying the history of Android into today in many different ways, kind of walking through some parts of the book. Fascinating conversation. And then we spend the rest of the episode along with Chet talking about the biggest touchstone points from this year. So everything, the biggest news, the biggest hardware, the apps, development tools and news, all that from the year 2022. That's coming up next on All About Android.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is All About Android, episode 609, recorded Tuesday, December 20th, 2022, the year in review. This episode of All About Android is brought to you by Code Comments, an original podcast from Red Hat that lets you listen in on two experienced technologists as they describe their building process and what they've learned from their experiences. Search for Code Comments in your podcast player. Hello, welcome to All About Android. This is the show where we spend each and every week talking about the latest news, hardware, and apps for the Android faithful. I'm Jason Howell.
And I'm Ron Richards.
And I'm TWiT DAO.
Yeah, and this is the last live, kind of the last normal live episode of the year, because if you didn't know, we're almost in the new year, 2023, right around the corner. We do have one more episode this year, next week. We've got a best of. We've already recorded that. So
don't spoil it for everyone. Make them think it's live. Come on.
No, it's totally live.
Right.
We're coming back for that and wearing the same outfits we wore that other show.
And
we are so
we will
dedicated.
celebrate all the great moments of this show. But
so very dedicated that we would sacrifice our holiday break for you. We would do it, but we don't have to, so we're not going to. But
fair enough.
Thank you for being here today, because this is actually a really special episode. Usually on this episode, we kind of take a look back, as a lot of the shows on the TWiT network do, on the year in Android, and take a look at some of the biggest things that have happened in all of those categories: news, hardware, apps, development news, especially now that we have Huyen on board. But this year's we're going to do a little bit of that. That's going to be a little bit later. We're going to start things off, though, with something entirely different, because joining us, our esteemed guest this evening, and we're super thrilled to have him, Chet Haase, engineer on the graphics team at Google and author of, if you hadn't already heard about this book, because I know we've talked about it on the show before, Androids, the team that built the Android operating system. Chet, thank you so much for sacrificing your evening for us.
Hey, everybody. Nice to be here talking.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We've got a lot of the current history to talk about. But before we get into that, I think kind of the original reason that, Huyen was the one that told me, hey, Chet might want to come on the show and talk a little bit about the distant history of Android, which is really what you wrote all about. And you were saying in the pre-show, you spent the past 5 years ingesting all of this information. So why not put you to the test and, have you kind of walk through all the things you spent so much time writing about?
That sounds perfect. Yeah, well, to be fair, I spent 5 years sort of on the book project, but I spent basically the last 12 and a half years ingesting and then focusing on, that was the output. The last 5 years was just the trying to figure out what to do with all that information.
So at what point are you like, man, I've been a part of this, community and subculture for so long. I think there's a story here to be told, because I've worked in publishing. I've worked with a lot of writers, and I'm always fascinated by, there's that moment where the light bulb goes off and you're like, oh, I'm the one who has to tell this story. What was that like for you?
So it was probably two moments after being there a couple of years, because frankly, the first couple of years I was too busy doing just Android development to think about anything else. But after the first couple of years, I realized, a lot of the early story is really interesting, especially as Android started to become, somewhat successful. and kind of wondering how did that work, and knowing the team and some of the personalities and the culture there, I thought, oh, this would be an interesting story. Somebody should tell this eventually before everybody forgets. And then it was another 5 years where I realized, well, nobody is doing that. So maybe that is my job to do instead.
I mean, it was destined to happen. Someone at some point was going to do this, right? And thankfully it was you, because you did a fantastic
something like that. Although something interesting I've realized recently as I've been talking to people about the book and the history is so few of these stories do get told for whatever reason, right? Like I think there are remarkable examples, like there's one on, the early Mac thing. I heard about a Windows NT thing the other day. There's a great documentary about General Magic, but I think in general, the stories about how projects happen don't get told either because, that startup went boom and everybody went off and did something else, or there's, fear in the company about, that's internal property.
That's secret.
And we don't tell people
Right.
Or
well,
sorry.
I was gonna say that was my next question. Was that like when you decided to write the book, did you have to get Google PR to say it was okay? Like did people start acting differently around you, or like what? How did that
go? Two very separate questions. Yeah, everybody just filters everything they say to me. So I'll address that one first, which is everybody was incredibly open to me. Like that was really a nice thing about doing this project, and I think that's one of the keys that makes something like this work. It's another reason why you're not just going to get like an average journalist to tell a story like this, because nobody would trust that person, right? What is their agenda? Yeah. Whereas people knew what I was doing on the team and they knew what I was trying to do with the story. And so they were very open about what happened there, without applying that filter. I did, because I work at a big company and big companies do have lawyers and I am afraid of lawyers in general, I did need to tell people that I was working on this and to make sure that that was okay with people. It is not a Google project. On the other hand, I am a Google person. And so you need to be really careful and you need to get help sometimes to help determine what is okay to say. Mm-hmm. If I'm talking about business deals, what parts of that are actually public or distributable or,
privileged information or like things like that, company secrets and that sort of thing. Yeah. And, it probably got real tiresome in the cafeteria to explain why you're always recording on your phone, right?
If only you had Google Recorder like 5 years ago, it would have made a lot of this way easier, right?
That came in so far too late. Oh, it would have been. And now just in the past couple of months or sometime recently, I've heard, now there's some ability to like record, this is this person, this is this other person. So yeah, they're doing the thing that took me like 10 times the recording time to transcribe. Now they're just doing it past when I needed it.
Absolutely one of my favorite recent Google creations as far as apps are concerned. I've been not a lifetime. I was about to say a lifetime Maps user. Maybe it feels like a lifetime, but love Google Maps. But Recorder lately, strangely, has had many moments in my life where I'm like, that is insanely useful. When you have a really great question in here, I want to make sure that you get the chance to ask it, because when I read this, I was like, that is a great place to start with the contents of the book.
Yeah, and actually, we're going to start at a great place, which is the beginning. And, Chet, you mentioned at the beginning of the book that you have kind of a typical tech person experience where, maybe at the chagrin of your parents, you, as an engineer, jumped to a lot of different jobs, like a lot of different positions, a lot of different engineering companies. And that actually is quite usual and the norm in the tech industry. In fact, I think when, you might, go to a conference and meet another engineer who's worked at a place, say 5 or 10 years, you're like, whoa, that's like a really long time. And it's really interesting because, I think these days it's seen as common and usual to kind of jump around. But what's really cool is that whenever y'all actually let the Android team out the office and, out into the, open air and into the public at like conferences, there's always been like these handful of faces that, we've seen the entire time. So Diane Hackborn, all hail Diane, our Lord and Savior of Android framework. And, Dan Sandler, Raman Gee, Zav. What is it about Android, do you think, that keeps these folks that have been there from the beginning, these senior engineering folks around? And, I know some of them may have like gone to other projects and come back, but what is it, even in this kind of environment where people tend to jump jobs, that keeps these amazing people on Android?
Great question. So there are a couple of things in my mind. when I saw something about this question that was being batted around, and I was reminded of an SNL sketch that's going to date me horribly, where they would hire a baseball player for a lot of money to give a speech, and the baseball player would say, "Baseball's been very, very good to me." And that was the speech. And so the point is, it is a good company and a good organization to work for. Like, let's just put that out there and say, of the big companies I've worked for, hey, this is a pretty awesome place to be. And so I think that certainly makes it easier for people to stick around rather than, startups that go away or places that have cultures that are unhealthy or whatever. That is one reason why people might move on and try something new. But more specifically, I think this is, to the point of the story and the book, the things that Android has been able to achieve, I think, are very unlikely to occur a lot in someone's career. And so the ability to sort of stick around and help contribute to something that so many people across the entire planet are using on a daily basis is kind of gratifying, right? Like, you get to have very visible impact on this thing that you helped create and improve over the years. And so I think it's just an interesting project for people to sort of stick with. And there's different things to do. I myself have moved around to, 3 or 4 different roles on the Android team to try different things out. It's a large enough organization that you can try different things without leaving the mothership, as it were.
One thing, so obviously your book touches in a number of different places. It starts, talking about kind of the arc of Android, right? It starts with Photo Farm. That's, when is that? That's like 2004, 2005-ish, yep. All the way through 2010. That's when you joined. But prior to that, all of these things happened. We had the Android 1 release. We had the G1, which I know is near and dear to Ron's heart. We had the Motorola Droid, which was near and dear to my heart. The proximity of the Droid to the Nexus One, which I didn't realize was only 3 months different. And I guess my question there is, so I was... My first Android device was the Motorola Droid. And through reading the book, it was funny to hear kind of the inside talk about the Droid being like, is that really finished? Because it kind of in some ways, compared to a polished experience, a polished device like the Nexus One, the Droid really is the antithesis to it, hard edges and everything like that. Yet it had the benefit of coming out prior to the Nexus One. And I guess my question there is, obviously internally, it seems like Googlers really wanted to champion and wanted the Nexus One to be the device to get everybody excited about Android. And right. I'm not sure that it necessarily worked out that way. If the Nexus One had come out prior to the Motorola Droid, do you think that would have changed that perception?
Not being a business or marketing person, I'm totally unqualified to answer the question. So I'll jump in and say, I don't think it would have worked. I really don't. So when you talk to everybody, like, they had their passion, their emotion was there. And like, this was going to be the best representative of, Android, the platform, and the form factor was awesome. And it was all curvy and smooth and it fit in your hand really well, as opposed to that, jagged, hard edge thing. However, the thing that was really interesting when the Droid came out was a bunch of engineers on the team, like, as they told me, the engineers on the team were like, this, the passion, that Nexus One, that's the better engineered product. That's the thing that's really going to shine. And we're going to sell it on our store. And it's, it's going to be, the phone and the market of the future. But the reality is that advertising and marketing work. So Verizon, a company that really knows how to do that, basically went all in on Droid, and they took advantage of what the team thought were the disadvantages. As you said, it was like all these hard edges. It seemed kind of clunky, like more like a prototype than a phone. And they just said, no, it's this robotic thing. That is good. That is the look of our premium device. It's going to be awesome. And then they did this campaign, which was hugely successful. The Droid Does campaign. You can still see these videos on YouTube.
I remember it.
And it turns out that works. That sells devices. That gives people mind share so that they understand this thing, as opposed to like Google launching a phone and putting it on a website. Like I think there was this expectation that, the masses would just flood to the site. Well, that's not really how capitalism works, right? Like, yes, websites are important, but I think the fact that the company had put so much money and effort into driving the marketing for that particular device, that really did it. The timing was interesting though, because there was a possibility they were going to come out too close together.
Yeah.
And then there was a conflict internally, like, well, if you got two bugs and one of them's the Google device and one of them's this thing that we're helping a partner with, which one do you work on? And at some point, Andy said, you work on the partner device. It's important for that to succeed, as opposed to like, you're always conflicted and then maybe neither one ends up being good enough. So let's build a little room into the schedule so that we can actually launch or help launch the Droid successfully, and then we launch our own device.
Yeah. Meanwhile, this was at a time when you could probably count the amount of Android devices that were available on market, on one hand. Now, I mean, obviously, that's a completely different story.
You'd need at least two.
Yes, exactly.
And I can't help but think, Chet, as you're talking about that and kind of the past, we evaluate the past by our present, right? And so now you're in a position where Google now has the Pixel line and is building out that line and kind of building on that dream that was set, kind of 15 years ago. Does it just take, looking at the totality of the history of Android, did it just take this long for all the pieces to fall in place, or did the stumbles and learnings have to happen in order to get to where we are now with a unified line and kind of what is as close to an ecosystem as it gets?
I think there are a lot of things that contribute to the current realities of the Pixel stuff being out there. Like, there was always the intention from the beginning of doing a device, whether you were helping partners with it and therefore learning more about what their needs were and incorporating that into the platform, or whether it was the Nexus line where, we were developing that in lockstep with each of the releases. You needed a reference device to really prove out the things you were putting in this platform that you intended everybody else to use for their devices. Otherwise, it's all fiction. But those Nexus devices, like they were, some of them were quite nice, right? Like I loved my Nexus S. Really nice form factor, and I think the 5 was really nice. Is that the one I'm remembering?
The 5 was. So Chet, the Nexus 5. I'll tell you. So here at All About Android, we have an unofficial Android Hall of Fame, and the first device entered into the Android Hall of Fame was the Nexus 5 because the Nexus 5 was a pretty damn perfect phone in my at
the time. It was a pretty solid phone, especially
it was good
for us, for enthusiasts especially, right? Maybe not for everyone, but for us, it really checked a lot of the boxes. Even though, like, by default, the Nexus One would have to be in there as well. But anyway, that's a whole tangent. That's a whole road we can go down to get lost on. But
I think you picked the right word there, which is enthusiasts, right?
Yeah.
It never really, none of those phones really made it sort of beyond that kind of market there. And I think the intention with the Pixel phones, at least the way I see it, is these are meant to be, real phones coming out from real companies, shipping in real quantities, really fit and finish on every one of those. It's not the sort of, mixed bag that you got with some of those, where some of the intention with Nexus was to, try out features and see if they landed. Like, no, these are supposed to be good premium phones. With, the follow-on sort of A versions coming out as well, which is kind of a nice model to follow. And now we've kind of hit the groove and we're doing this solid thing. And now people recognize, okay, well, the company is doing this and they have certain expectations. So I can't imagine this was like in the plan from the beginning. I think a lot of things had to come together to say, okay, this is the time when the company is going to invest more and think more in the future about sort of hardware visions as well. Separately from platform is this hardware product thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. Now, we did ask some of the other hosts who are not with us today, this evening, if they had any questions. And Florence Ion, who is on at least once a month, had this question for you. She says, in the book, you wrote about a dilemma. Does Google focus Android on the platform or on the product verticals, which ties exactly in with what you're talking about here. Obviously, early on, Google opted for the former. Now we have the Pixel line. Have times changed, or is the platform still the most important focus? I guess from your perspective, from the inside working on Android, how important still is the platform when you're faced with the struggles and challenges of, another team's most, highest priority, which is the product line on which your product exists? Right.
So imagine for a second that Google and Android might be large organizations. And that's kind of an important point because I would say,
hard to imagine, right?
But yeah, okay. I'm with
They're
you.
both really important. I think that the trouble in the early days was it was a teeny, teeny, tiny little team, right? So to get to 1.0, by the time 1.0 launched, there was 100 people on the team. And that was like apps, services, platform, kernel, everything, including the systems team that was helping bring up G1 and, work with partners on other future devices. So that was everybody. And so the question of like, do we focus on a product or a platform was really critical then, because they had to focus. And it turns out they actually did focus on both. Like you said, clearly, platform was most important, but the team thought clearly both were, which was, I think it was more important that the platform itself succeed, because that is where the ecosystem comes from in the larger Android universe. But it was also really important for the team to actually bring up devices and to have the G1 to aim for, because otherwise, as I said before, it's just fiction. Yeah. Like, is it actually going to do the job if you're not actually proving it out on current and future hardware? But now fast forward to a Google and an Android that has many, many more people on it, and you can have a separate hardware organization that is essentially another OEM shipping Android releases. We on the Android team focus on Android, the platform, right? So to some extent, maybe it removes that like dilemma and conflict that we had earlier on, although, we still obviously need to be aware of what's going on in hardware, but we're not shipping those devices. Instead, we're focusing on what the platform needs, because still, no matter how successful Pixel devices are, it's the ecosystem of Android that is the most critical for Android, the platform. We need to make sure the platform works for everybody, including Pixel, but also including, Samsung and everybody else who's shipping these things.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, that's a really great point. I think some of that starts to leak into kind of what I love about the story from an engineering perspective. And I think something that kind of came to my mind reading the book was kind of like all these decisions. Like it's kind of amazing how small the team was and how much I guess initiative and just like hard work, like a ton of hard work that everyone had to do pulls together. It's insane. And what really caught me, like as you're talking about certain things, like even like these little minute details that or like, they text you or like input, input through like the keyboard. And it's really funny because I think for day-to-day engineers, there's this kind of thing that gets said a lot, which is YAGNI, which for non-engineering folks means you ain't going to need it or you aren't going to need it, which generally is kind of like a good engineering guideline that, you should not necessarily add functionality or optimize things that you don't really need to yet, right? You always try to focus on like what will get you the minimum viable product, what you need today, and not to look too far forward, because sometimes you ain't going to need it. And it kind of tends to make more work or work that you don't ultimately you need to throw away or something. But what I think is so cool going through Androids and the story of the team is that the team was so like far thinking and just really imagining this as a platform and thinking, what do we need? Well, if we want to do, multiple languages, that means like maybe multiple keyboards. So instead of just hard coding a keyboard, they created an entire system for like different kinds of inputs and kind of like different ways to plug in, like different ways of inputting, text into the phone. There was like, just all kinds of things that in kind of isolation, maybe at that time when y'all just even had prototype devices where you really didn't necessarily have a way to say, you ain't going to need it or you are going to need it. There were so many different decisions that I, as a developer, can see now that, oh, shoot, that makes a lot of sense. Like now, it's easier to have apps work great on different form factors. Accessibility is easier. Like different inputs are easier. And I kind of was curious as you're like kind of surveying all this and looking at all these decisions, what do you think? I mean, what do you think? Where do you think that originated? That kind of forethought and that those good decisions, those things that actually have paid off even now in 2022. Is it just the fact that it's a platform and people had the vision to, build towards that? Was it literally like the experiences? Like from the people from B, from Palm, from Microsoft Nature? Is it just that you got that Android got lucky with the experience that was on hand that was just the way that they thought? Or was it just even the individual persons and just having specific things that they wanted? Where did this foresight come from? Because certainly, I don't know, you always hear YAGNI, but I think in this case, like YAGNI was the opposite, because in the end, we all needed it. So I don't know. Where that came from.
Or is that
YAGNI,
a special
YAGNI?
Kind of beef cut or something?
YAGNI, yeah.
I had a great cut of WAGNI in Vegas once. It was fantastic.
Yeah, great question. And And as you said, it was a constant conflict. Like, I think for the most part, like 90%, the team was just running as fast as possible. And there would be like some argument or discussion or disagreement on the way a particular thing would work. And then somebody would go away for a few hours, bang out some code and move on because they did not have time to discuss anymore. They just needed a solution and moved on. And so there was a lot of very pragmatic stuff happening, but occasionally they would step back and go, no, the right thing for us to do is that. You mentioned the IME stuff for keyboards, the density stuff that came in maybe in 1.1 or so was one of those as well, like allowing these different form factors and screen sizes to kick in. And I think from the conversations that I had with people like Diane and other people on the team, that a lot of that comes from the individuals you mentioned, but more specifically the experiences that they had, right? So a lot of these people, you mentioned people like Diane and other people came from, they had worked at BOS and that got acquired by Palm and spun out into Palm Source and blah, blah, blah. What they were working on that whole time was a platform at B and then a platform at Palm starting to target toward mobile devices. And what they learned along the way, they learned, mostly from failure, as they pointed out, like they had a lot of projects fail, but they learned things to do next time around. And one of those was to make sure that you are targeting the future for important things like form factors. Like they learned, I think it was on the Palm OS, operating system they were working on, that's you need to handle form factor changes because that's going to come up. It came up in the software they developed there. So they knew that it was going to come up there on Android when they worked on it. And if you looked at like Android after a couple of releases, like, yeah, these devices, these crazy devices started to come out from all over the world with different form factors, and then Android just naturally handled it. In the meantime, there's another manufacturer that was shipping devices that came out with a screen size. And when they came out with a larger screen size, it needed to be the same form factor. It was the same aspect ratio because the tools that they'd given developers to handle these kind of changes didn't handle that. They do now, like they got there eventually, but they didn't build it in from the beginning because they weren't in the mode of thinking about the ecosystem and where the ecosystem could go. And that was kind of critical for putting in some of these early features that people figured they are going to need eventually. I'm not sure about the trackball. Trackball, you might need to subtract that.
I enjoyed the trackball. The trackball had a soft spot in my heart, but
Just for missile command, right?
Yeah, sure, exactly. Right. For gaming and that sort of thing. Yeah. But it's also interesting because to hear you talk about what the early days and kind of what the development team was doing and how they were working, and it seemed as if the Android built a culture within its own silo inside of Google, and you talk about the team being small versus now being very, very large, and Google being a massive behemoth kind of company. Is that type of Android culture in its own style still the case, or have things become more unified with Google over time? And in either direction, what does that differentiation kind of enable? Like, what are the risks of operating like that? Kind of almost being a company inside of a company.
Oh, wow. This is a conversation. How much time do we have tonight?
As much as you want.
So yeah, the size and the siloing of the organization, so they kind of ran it like a different startup inside of the company. And I've heard this about acquisitions before, and it's usually false. But they really did. They ran it very separately. Only the leadership dealt with the rest of Google. Everybody else ignored Google. And I credit that with a lot of the success that they had, because at a time when, Google had certain processes to follow and you really need to be doing design reviews and design docs, and you need to be in committees making these decisions and like really good, robust, mature software development practices, writing tests, stuff like that. The team basically did not have time for that. What they really needed to do was crank incredibly hard and fast to hit a teeny tiny window of opportunity. And they did. And by doing that, by building up this like culture that was protected from the rest of Google, unfortunately, they kind of built up walls around Google that are still kind of virtually there. I would say it's a lot bigger organization. Most of the people on Android were not there then. They don't know anything about this, but there were sort of processes and practices built up from the very fast running and very differently organized team at the time that we're still kind of recovering from to some degree. We're, learning best practices about software developments. I would say we've mostly learned them, but I think we're still coming up to speed with how larger companies may do things, just because Android did have its own way of doing things from the beginning, its own processes, by which I mean none.
You got to start somewhere.
Can I just interrupt for a second that one of my favorite quotes that you kind of include in the book is from friend of the show, Chuki Chan, and a very good friend of mine, when you were talking about testing and she was on Maps and you asked her about testing on Android. And what did she say? She was like, testing. There was no such thing as testing. Yeah. And that's an amazing quote, y'all, for Android in 2022. That is just like bonkers. So I very much appreciate the honesty on that to see from where we started and where things are now. So
it's a little embarrassing. I was writing a lot of tests very recently for some of the graphic stuff I've been working on, and finding it really helpful to write these tests, and then you catch problems in the API or functionality or whatever. I'm like, oh, this is a great practice. Wouldn't it be nice if we were doing this before? And I remembered I was working on with the team with someone, this is probably back in 2011-ish, and this person was very TDD, very like, I'm going to write all the tests in the universe and then I'm going to start writing the code. And I could not understand that attitude because I had work to do. I didn't have time for tests. I needed to check in the code that would actually do the stuff. And like now I get it. I still believe we didn't really have a lot of time to do, to cross all the T's correctly at the time, but it is a really good software development practice that we kind of maybe suffered from for not doing as well as we could have. On the other hand, that is the trade-off, right? I do believe that the team was able to hit a time frame that would have been impossible were they being a bit more mature. I should also point out too that the size of the team had a lot to do with this. If you have a really large team, everybody needs to communicate effectively. Everybody's working on the same source base, and you need these practices in place to make sure that everybody's not breaking each other all the time. But if the team is really tiny and you've got each engineer working on 5 different products all at the same time, 5 different, huge feature areas, like they're doing Gtalk and they're also doing SMS and they're also doing MMS and they also own all of media. Then they can keep all the code in their head all at the same time and they can be responsible for all of it. And there doesn't need to be as much process to deal with that. There should be, and there can be eventually. But I think the necessity really kicks in companies as they grow. As you add people to do work, then you need to have processes to make sure the work is happening robustly.
Yeah, and congruently. This actually really ties in with exactly what you're talking about. Another guest host on the show, Michal Rahman from Esper.io, who I'm sure you are familiar with at some point, Chet. He's the one that writes the exhaustive detail around every version of Android that comes out. Really great work. He comes on the show about once a month at this point. And he had a question that ties in with what you're talking about here. He says, can you describe how the process of shipping a new Android feature has actually changed over time? Because near the start, Android had, kind of like you were talking about, less people developing with less users, less stakeholders, partners, market reach. Now, of course, serving billions of users all over the world, many thousands of companies invested in either the platform or the ecosystem or both. So does that then bring with it a lot more red tape internally now compared to where it was 10 years ago when you joined the team? A lot more internal reviews. What's that look like? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, big changes.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I remember giving a talk at a conference, 10 years ago with Roma, my friend on the team, and a person came up to us afterwards and said, so I'm curious about the process of Android for shipping software, exactly what you're asking, Jason. How do you ship the software? And we said, well, we write the code and then we ship the release. And he's like, yeah, that's very funny. But no, really, what is your process? And we said, no. We write the code and then we ship the release. And it really kind of was that much process, right? Everybody was responsible for their code. We had code reviews. Code reviews were good. Wait, okay. So I should realize some people didn't. Some people might have +2'd their own code and put it in because they were that confident about it. And the build system actually let them do that at that time. But for the most part, we got code reviews, and then you worked on the code enough. And if it broke in testing, as people were walking around with their phones in their pockets, then you'd fix it, and eventually the release would ship. So fast forward a few years, and that is not the way that we ship Android releases anymore. We actually have a lot of tests that get run all the time, a lot of tests that get written all the time. We
Continuously.
have feature requests. We have people that approve these. We have things that line up to the things that the feature, the release needs to have. We need, people actually thinking about what it is we're shipping as opposed to individual engineers kind of more or less throwing the code over the wall. Like the engineers, they were domain experts, the person working on GTalk and SMS and MMS and all that. Like they knew what needed to happen, especially in the early days. Like it was really obvious, all the gaps that needed to be plugged. But now, you can't just like make random decisions in your domain area. You're going to go, well, this makes sense. How about this feature? And this is the way it lines up with other things. So yeah, a lot more process, a lot more overhead. That's the way big companies work.
Yeah.
Yep.
No question.
Well, speaking of I guess growing up, I think one of the most comforting and I guess sympathy inducing things that I've ever heard is probably at some fireside chat, which Chet usually MCs and which has a lot of the people that you'll hear about in the book and a lot of the amazing engineers that are, working on Android now. One of the best things I ever heard that made me feel so good or so much better about myself as an engineer was Diane Hackborn, again, all hail Diane, expressed publicly that, they made the best decisions they could in that time and at that place, but that, as the mobile smartphone space has evolved, as users have evolved, has the kind of apps and the kind of way that people use their phones have evolved, some of those, choices that were the best at the time have become, a little, I guess, less ideal or less optimal in retrospect, because, for all the best efforts of the team, the rest of us and as users and engineers are just, ruining all that. So I was kind of curious, as y'all move forward, there are things like, that, how do you, I guess, what's the philosophy of the team for moving forward and trying to move with the times and trying to address some of these issues? I mean, I guess I basically am asking about tech debt and, how as a team, especially on a team that works on a platform that serves billions of devices and so many users, what's the approach now these days to try to move forward, especially, having to maintain services and stability for all these people? I mean, I love talking on the show about Compose. Everyone take a drink because that's the drinking game on the show. Whenever everyone says Compose, and that felt like a big concentrated effort. But I mean, is it always just going to be like that? Is it always going to be this big kind of sweeping thing, or is there a lot of things that people do day to day that keep driving Android forward and keep trying to make the best decision for now, and going forward? How do you future proof?
How indeed. So many topics in here. One of them is, so I always think it's a shame that software engineering in school doesn't really teach you the most important thing about software engineering in the real world, which is integrating your code into a large existing backward and forward compatible code base. I don't know how to do that in the context of a school, so there's a really good reason they don't do that. But that ends up being most of the job. It's not about an API to do this. It's not about, the code to fix that bug. It's how do you do that? How do you integrate that API with all the other APIs around it? And how do you fix that bug without breaking something else? Somebody on the TextView team was pointing out that they have a really hard time fixing bugs because every time they've made the right fix in the code, it'll just break something somewhere else because it tends to be a bit fragile. And people are using it in particular ways that are kind of, compatible with the bugs that are there. So how do you do that in the future? And APIs in general, I think, are sort of at the source of this. It has nothing to do with Android. It's that APIs, welcome to the world where everything you do needs to work exactly the same in the future. I call developing APIs building in future regret. Because there is no way that any API you design now is going to do exactly what you wanted it to and serve all the needs for everybody 10 years from now. Because the way that people will use it and the new needs that come up that you did not anticipate mean that there's going to be something wrong about it, right? Oh, maybe I should have inherited from this other interface over there, or what if I had done this other, more fluent programming thing over here, or whatever it is. All you can do is make the best decision, like Diane said, at the time, and then move on. And then hopefully, in the case of Android, you're at least successful enough that you get to keep working on it and get to keep improving it over time, which means I can't break that API, but at least maybe I could add other things. So Compose is a great example where you keep adding and adding to the toolkit, and something that was basically functional and you can do a lot of stuff with became more and more brittle and hard for people to deal with. And then at some point we said, okay, well, we need this unbundled because we can't keep fixing these bugs and nobody's getting them at the time when we want them to use them. And B, we could actually improve things. Like we could take a big step back and say, yeah, but what do people actually want from a UI toolkit? So instead of just moving all of the widgets and components over into app compat, maybe we could actually come out with a new API that does something new. And there's a real trick about doing that. When do you do that with any particular feature area? Because you could lose people along the way, right? Like if you say, okay, here's our new UI toolkit, and people say, no, I'm fine. I have other things to do in my app, or I'm going to go over and use this other UI toolkit over there. Like, how do you convince people this is the way of the future, as opposed to just having them maintain their legacy code instead? I don't know if I answered everything in your question.
There was a lot there, but no, I mean, I think I appreciate that because it is a hard question. I think a lot of times, especially for various reasons in the news, people keep talking about engineering these days and like, why can't engineers do this? Why is it so hard? Why do you need like a team of 100 engineers to maintain a service or something? And I think it's these kind of unseen battles and decisions and trying to live up to your promises and but still make the future better. That it's complicated. It was a bit of a stacked question, but it's not an easy thing to answer, really. Like, how do you handle all these different things and still make a service like that people can use as you're trying to make it better? So,
or even a future compatible service. Like Diane's overall team is kind of at the heart of a lot of this difficulty. The framework team sort of building the core OS at the platform level, where they need to deal with changing privacy needs going forward, right? Like as soon as, people realize, I am not comfortable with my location being shared, or my files shouldn't have access, from all these different apps or whatever. And then they need to start buttoning down, okay, well, we need to protect the user data and privacy, but how do they do that in a way that's, compatible with apps that are already out there? Like to some extent, this is not a solvable problem. You can do it with, the Target SDK thing and say, well, you're building, you're going to be running on this release, therefore these are the new requirements. But then it's kind of pushing that burden onto developers. But that is the trade-off there. Like, how do you do these things in a way that continues the ecosystem and yet does the right things for the users in that massive ecosystem going forward?
Yeah. And it's interesting though, because it's like, towards the end of the book, you answer the question, how did Android succeed, right? And in the early days of Android, things were hyper focused on openness and this ethos of building this kind of platform and this ecosystem that can be that could exist. And here we are now, nearly a decade, from the events that you write about in the book. How do you think you define Android success in today's landscape, right? Like what is defined for success for Android now? Because it used to be getting the OS in as many hands as possible, and for all intents and purposes, that's clearly you can still put it in more hands, but a lot of that that long climb up the mountain has kind of happened. So how has it shifted from back in the beginning to where we are today?
I think the main thing we need to do is to get people to grow more hands. I think that's the way we get there. If you'll notice, for the last several years, we don't really talk numbers so much anymore. Like occasionally at an I/O, they will say, hey, we got, this many devices. I think the last one was I/O a couple of years ago, like 3.5 billion or whatever. Like they'll mention it occasionally. It used to be like every year it'd be like, hey, look at this, look at this, look at that. And then eventually it's just not interesting anymore because, there's a lot of people. And then it's more about serving the needs of those people and serving the needs of the manufacturers. Like hardware devices are coming out with new capabilities. We need to make sure that those are handled in the platform. Users have more needs around, privacy, data security, whatever. And so it's all about sort of continuing on this rather fast treadmill to make sure that the releases that we're coming out with and the devices are coming out with are going to be competitive in an ever competitive market. Like it's never gotten easier. I love there was a quote from Hiroshi at the end where I said, so what do you think about, being successful? He's like, we're not there. Like All we are is like, we're still here and we get to keep working on it. Like the competition is really fierce. What's exciting is continuing to get to work on this thing so that you can address those competitive needs going forward. That to me also is success. It's, well, hey, we're still here. Like I can look at APIs I created 12 years ago and go, that's a shame. I bet we could do a better job of that, but at least we're still around so that we can do that. Right. I think if we weren't successful, that means, well, that ship sailed and that's another product I worked on that's no longer there. And let's go find another job in the Valley.
It's nice to have that legacy, right?
For sure. So. Yeah. And I mean, that is what propels you to the point. You know, it's just that way in life, right? We are who we are because of the things we did well and the mistakes we made. It's all part of the soup. Love the book. Anyone who has not read it yet really needs to check it out, especially because I would imagine the Venn diagram of people who would enjoy this book and who enjoy Android enough to subscribe to a weekly podcast about it is the overlap is huge. So Androids, the team that built the Android operating system, author Chet Haase, who is sticking around. He's not going anywhere on this episode, but he's written a wonderful book. Y'all should check it out. I do also want to mention that, and you point this out, all profits from the book, they go to charity. They're donated to charities like Women Who Code and Black Girls Code. So yeah, that's just yet another awesome thing about what you're doing with the book and everything. So, and also just a huge congrats to you, because anytime I talk to someone who's written a book, and this is not your only book, I know you've written others, but I'm just always in awe of anyone who can organize thoughts, organize information, create a book. It's a long process, as you talked about earlier. So I'm very impressed anytime I talk to someone as successful in writing a book as you are. So awesome stuff. Thank you, Chet.
Well, thanks.
Also,
thanks for the conversation.
Chet also narrated the audiobook version as well.
That's right.
So, which is
very cool.
I feel bad because I think that both, I would recommend both, because obviously the book has visuals. There's a lot of great images in there, but also listening to Chet. I've listened to many of Chet's technical talks, and the book is even more entertaining and made me laugh out loud quite literally several times. So yes, not often you get to hear the book narrated in the author's own words. So I can also highly recommend that if you're more of the book listening type.
There you go. I totally agree. Okay, but don't go anywhere, Chet. Don't go anywhere, listeners and viewers. We're going to be taking a look. We've already had a decent amount of show. We've got more show coming up because we're going to look at the year and kind of talk through some of the major touch points from throughout the year in the world of Android. That's coming up next. But first, we want to take a moment to thank the sponsor of this episode of All About Android, and that is Code Comments, which is an original podcast from Red Hat. You got to check this out. And actually, today's the perfect episode to have Code Comments as a sponsor, because we've got a lot of developers who follow this show, possibly more developers following this episode because of Chet's presence on the show. So it's a match made in heaven, really. You know, when you're working on a project and you leave behind just a little reminder in the code, that is, of course, a code comment, and that's there to help others learn from your work. And that's kind of the idea behind Code Comments, an original podcast from Red Hat. This podcast takes that idea by letting you listen in on two experienced technologists as they actually describe their own building processes. So there's a lot of work that you already know about that's required to bring a project from the whiteboard, from that kind of strategy stage into development, and none of us can do it alone. The host, Burr Sutter, is a Red Hatter and lifelong developer advocate, as well as a community organizer. And every episode, Burr actually sits down with experienced technologists from across the industry. And, they trade stories, talk about what they've learned from their experiences. Fascinating stuff. If you check out the first episode, you're going to hear an interview with David Duncan at Amazon Web Services, which, again, when I listen to this, it really illustrates what it means to work within the open source playground while also working with partners while development is underway, which, has its own set of challenges. And so you learn all about that. Think of that as your little code comment dotted within Code Comments. Episodes are available anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also find them at redhat.com/code comments podcast. redhat.com/Code Comments podcast. But really, just search for Code Comments in your podcast player. And we're going to include a link in the show notes as well, so you can find that there. And just a huge thanks to Code Comments for their support of All About Android. We think you're reaching the right people being here with us on All About Android. All right, so thank you for that. All right, now, Burke, I don't want to steal the thunder from you. You know, I thought about no bumpers today, but then I was like, but then that doesn't give you the opportunity to hit that news bumper one last time before the end of the year. So as I hear an audible sigh from him.
Well, I don't have a very good one.
You don't need a very good one. Just bring yourself.
Okay.
That's all I ask.
Well, it's been a great year. I'm looking forward to another great year.
Okay. Hey, that's honesty. That's honesty right there.
There it is.
I like it. See, you bring your best self sometimes, Burke. Sometimes.
It's been a great year with Burke behind the wheel.
That's right.
Burke's my favorite.
So this first block is really about looking at the kind of the general news. And often, when we're doing the show week after week, if there's ever a change to, if there's ever a new version of Android or a new beta or a new developer preview or whatever, it ends up at the top of the news block. I'm ashamed to say that in prepping for this show, I had everything in the rundown. And then I think it was Mishal who took a look at the rundown and he was like, you don't have Android 13 in there. I was like, oh my God, I am so embarrassed. But I mean, that's the biggest news each and every year for Android fans, right? Is the latest and greatest version of Android. How are we feeling living with Android 13 right now? Like is it checking off some boxes for us? Do you have excitement about it, Ron? What do you think?
I mean, my gut is no, and that's because I think it's doing what it needs to, which is that it's not turning my world upside down every year. It's slowly incrementing and making everything a little better, a little more polished. Mm-hmm. And so, honestly, Android 12, I'm not surprised you left off Android 13 because I feel like the transition from Android 12 and then Android 12L into 13 was so smooth, it was almost not noticeable this year.
Yeah.
From my perspective, at least. So.
Yeah. And hearing the answer being no, I'm really curious to know what you think, Chet, from an answer like that. And I think I understand where Ron is coming from. You probably do too. But there are some versions of Android that come out like a couple of years ago where it came out and everything changes. And from a user perspective, it's like we know the minute we hit that update and it refreshes, we're like, holy cow, what is this? All this material theming that's going on. What is this? Android 13 was not that kind of Android update. Still significant, but significant in a different way. What are your thoughts on that?
The thing that occurred to me when Ron was talking was we have a phrase that I've heard internally. Maybe it's not just our phrase, but moving the user's cheese. We try not to move their cheese too much, too far, too often. And if it's just arbitrary movement, like, all the buttons got bigger and everything shifted to the left or the right and, and then they can't find anything. And then they get really, really upset. Like they just want, when I upgraded my phone, I just wanted it to work the way that it used to. Yeah. And for the most part, that is what I think we try to achieve. Sometimes there's a good enough change. I'm going to put, some of the gesture stuff in there. Like, well, this seems powerful enough in terms of like taking over more real estate for the content that you want to see that it is worth moving the cheese a little bit. But you don't want to do that all the time. And so, as you said, some releases are maybe not about that. They're more about sort of polishing the fine details.
Well, I feel like you moved the cheese on us in 12 with the big bulbous kind of things. And I mean, Burke, if I remember correctly, that was your favorite part of 12 was just the visual changes. And 13, I feel it was just a refinement or just the next chapter with it.
I feel the cheese was moved a bit.
You feel the cheese has moved? Yeah.
You could sense the movement of the cheese. I love that analogy, by the way.
There was some dev cheese moved in 13, and I know it hasn't quite moved yet, but with like the back navigation and kind of I know back navigation is very contentious. It has been like, I know for all my career in Android development and always I know that the Android team has a specific point of view on how back navigation should be done. And then the rest of us are like, nah, the business people want me to do this and that. And design is like this, so I'm going to do this way. So I think it was really interesting, again, kind of in the theme of like moving the platform forward and like dragging all of us devs along with you is kind of like the idea of like, again, trying to move forward. And this is kind of like, yeah, hey devs, we're going to move your cheese next year. You can preview like the final position of the cheese so that you can, swap to maybe like a different type of cheese if you want to go to soft cheese or, stay with, hard cheese or wash run or whatever. And I thought that was really fascinating as a developer to see, kind of, I feel like Compose, like those kind of changes, Drink, is kind of like, there's always like certain changes where we can take it in our own time. But I really appreciated the idea with like the back navigation updates to be like, hey, get on the ball. You got until next year and go for it. So I thought that was pretty interesting in 13 and notable for some of us devs.
All I could think of is that we were just breathing a dead horse. That cheese analogy. Sorry.
I'm
got to get my dad jokes in there somehow.
Oh, man. Well, so Android 13 was big, but for me, I thought the biggest news story of the year had to be the messaging battleground and Google stepping up to the plate and lobbing one across the street at Apple with with calling them out for the practice of holding customers back with the green text bubbles, and then slowly the integration of not only RCS kind of evolving, but the integration of emoji reactions and things like that. Just like everything that happened on the messaging world, I think was huge this year compared to previous years.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly commanded a lot of attention. I guess the question, the question really remains going, as we head into 2023 is the challenges that Google faces right now with RCS. Like, it's great that all Android phones pretty much support RCS at this point, but especially here in the US, I mean, iPhone it's a contender, let's just say. It's a powerful force. And so not having them speaking the same language, that's a real big challenge. And I don't know that ever gets solved. Like, I don't know that I see Apple ever saying, all right, you win. Let's do this RCS thing. As much as I would love it, but it certainly got a lot of attention this year. Certainly had I think one of the things that kind of surprised me was from the perspective of Google's messaging. It wasn't just like, hey, we're doing this thing. It was, hey, we're doing this thing, and you, Apple, you aren't. You know what I mean? Sometimes I'm not so used to seeing Google kind of draw that line in the sand. It's, sometimes it's a little bit more passive than that. And I think it's a good thing for Google to draw that line in the sand once in a while. And so I think that was spot on. I don't know if how effective it's going to be, though. I guess that's the question. And
Chet, I mean, I know you're inside the Plex, but like watching that all play out as a Googler, what was it like for you? Was it, was it giggle-inducing? Was it nail-biter? What was your thought of how this all played out?
I'm just pleased that after the last couple of years and the world mess that we're in right now, that people still want to talk to each other. I think it's really nice, no matter what the platform. Doesn't matter how it gets there. Honestly, I'm too far inside to be following all this stuff very closely. I find it somewhat amusing that there's always another messaging solution, happening or being deprecated or coming up. And so I beyond that, nope. No opinions. I use the thing that's on my phone, and it gets to the person somehow.
Well, and I mean, and to that end, the majority of people don't even know RCS. What? Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. They're using a messaging app. They use that messaging app to message to somebody else. Unless they're technology, minded, passionate, nerds like us, they aren't realizing that it's RCS that did send that message, or if it was SMS that sent that message between them and the iPhone. It really, at the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter, because when you send a message from an Android phone, it still gets received on an iPhone. It's just how does it get received? And we, the nerds, care much more about that than the majority of users, I think. So,
I just know that somewhere there's 2 soup cans and a piece of string, and my message went across it. That's all I know. Exactly. When you were at Google I/O this year, so you got to kind of see the revitalized
but not quite totally 100% Google I/O, right?
Yeah, we got a little tired of the soup cans, and like thankfully this year, both Google I/O and Android Dev Summit, and like all these lovely Google events that we enjoyed in the before times came back. Of course, we're kind of easing back into it. So this year, Google I/O was a kind of hybrid event with the live keynotes, which I was at, happy to say. And then, of course, a majority virtual content, a lot of the usual kind of sessions and information that we've been used to kind of waiting in line for at Shoreline. We're mostly available online. And then similarly with the Android Dev Summit, I know like the format this year was quite a bit different than in previous years, where rather than just having like a 2-day like Dev Spectacular, it was also like a hybrid event where there was a significant amount of in-person sessions and informations, but also quite a bit of online stuff too, as well as like 3 different versions of it. I was like, I guess, Chet, how do you feel the feedback and I guess the engagement with like the new Android Dev Summit format went with the 3 different like events? Like, did you feel that it
neat.
allowed you to cover things that that you didn't get to cover in depth? Just usually like a 2-day conference is kind of like a marathon of technical content. How do you, or maybe the rest of the team, feel the new format is, and is that going to be the way going forward?
I cannot predict. I missed the old format because there was an in-person thing where we would get together with, I don't know, up to like 700, 800 of our closest friends and have a big group hug for a couple of days and just talk Android, right? Deep technical sessions and, hopefully get all your questions answered by people on the engineering teams in all the various technologies like that. I think that is hard to replicate with the online events. And I think they're trying different things, but it is one of the things that's really nice about online, especially after we did the unfortunate pivot from that. I don't know, supposedly there was a pandemic around and we needed to figure out how to work from home. Well, it turns out that you can actually broadcast an event like ADS or I/O to everybody. So instead of having, the 800 people that could, afford the travel expenses or be in the Bay Area to be there, then you can expand it to a much larger audience, which is fantastic. But then you can't really get the person-to-person connection in that way. And so I think they've been trying things out at these events to kind of cross that line and figure out how to do it all. I'm not sure it's quite there. The multiple events thing was interesting. I think that was an attempt to focus the content for each one of those in a particular way, which was somewhat consistent. But I think there was also an initial desire to also spread the event out so that some in-person things would be happening in other places in the world so that, again, you're not, just focusing on the people that can do an in-person thing in California. So there was some stuff happening in California and then there was more stuff happening in London. And the intention was there was stuff that was going to happen elsewhere. And then it turns out we still have this pandemic thing. And there was like, a surge every couple of months, something surprising would happen.
Yeah.
And so you kind of had to react to that and figure out what to do with that in very short notice. So I think it's good that we could get the content out there. I think it's great that we could get it out there to a larger audience. I am not sure how we get back to the original sort of more personally connected events that we've had in the past. I personally would like that. As much as I love doing videos, I don't love it as much as actually talking to real people in a real room.
Yeah, indeed. And it turns out Google I/O, you kind of get to do a little bit of both, right? I mean, you're doing videos, but you're also doing, real live people in a room. I don't know. I'm crossing my fingers. I know you can't talk about the future necessarily, but I'm crossing my fingers that this next year we're getting even closer back to the way Google I/O was, because I miss it. I miss that yearly kind of retreat and Nerdfest. I loved it. Couple of things just to mention real quick that were definitely in the news a good amount this year. The third-party billing struggles or I don't know if it's struggles, but this all has to do. A lot of this has to do with the EU and things going on there. Holding different companies to task for anti-competitive behavior, that sort of stuff. And so third-party billing was one thing that I think, if memory serves, was really directed from the EU to Apple, also to Google. But, Google is making these changes. And so we've seen this year it go from like, oh, is that actually going to happen, to now we've got Spotify offering a pilot. They're piloting the third-party billing option, and we've talked about that. At least in the last couple of months, how that's kind of going through, what that actually looks like. It's cutting the fees by 4%. Is that when to the perspective of developers, does that actually move the needle? Is that something that developers, does that feel like enough, or is it just kind of like, I don't know, giving a light service? It
feels like light service.
Yeah.
And it really does feel like light service. I think, we have joked often about the fact that it's called user choice billing, and a 4% reduction, by the way, not like 4% is the flat fee, but you could still be, having to fork over 26%, in fees. It feels like, when your parents tell you to do something, you just do it. You don't actually, you maybe are adhering to the word of the law and not the spirit of the law kind of thing. It feels like that. And I don't know, it kind of feels like that. And I know, I think this is the kind of thing that for, maybe if you look at raw numbers, if you just look at who is going to save the most money from this, of course, it's still going to be big, developers and publishers like Spotify. Even a 4% reduction is huge to them. But I would also argue that, even to independent devs, even though monetarily, if you're looking at raw numbers, it's not as much. But I don't know, I think it should be a thing that should encourage independent, it should be something that is meant to enable and encourage developers, big and small. And this kind of so-so measure on allowing third-party billing isn't that. It feels not something done for developers. So I'll leave it at that. I have strong feelings.
Ron, do you want to call out the little game service that wasn't quite?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody felt shocked at the news that Stadia was getting shut down. I think at what we saw, the number of promotions that were still in market at the time of the shutdown, it was all very shocking and unexpected, although not surprising. I feel that's where we kind of netted out. It was kind of we were wondering what was going on with Stadia for a while. And, and often, it's very hard to decipher. And Chet, this is one thing we enjoy to do in the show, to figure out what's going on behind the scenes, behind the walls of the Googleplex, of what the motivations are, as sometimes we introduce products and then they don't seem to take off and they either linger or get killed or whatnot. But Stadia was not one that we saw coming. I don't think anyone saw that one coming. So
I don't know. I feel like when Stadia first launched, I wondered how long it was going to last. I just had that feeling.
A lot of us were excited. I mean, but it was
excitement, but it was but is this going to last? Is it going to stand the test of time? And I think ultimately it seems like that kind of doubtful thinking could have been part of the reason why more people didn't hop on board. I don't know.
Who knows?
But that's a total guess. We've got far more top news than we could even cover. But just real quick, Android Auto got a pretty meaningful redesign. I haven't used it yet, but it looks really nice to have this split screen experience that Flo has talked about. The data safety section coming to the Play Store, I think that's really great. And actually, kind of just to mention real quick, the fact that whole news, a big part of that story was the fact that, part of the information that developers were putting there was going to go away in favor of a fully written kind of developer disclaimer as far as what the app does. Google listened to the feedback of the people that said, hey, wait a minute, don't take away the permissions list. We want that too. And so Google listened, and now we have everything in the Play Store. So kudos to Google for listening and for kind of, morphing along with that. App archiving, which we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, that happening with the Play Store. The Sonos audio patents that were infringed by Google, which seem to have impacted the casting, right? Wasn't it something with casting, Ron? You were talking about a cast issue that we're pretty certain might have something to do with the Sonos patent overlap.
I forget what was.
I can't forget what it was either.
It
yeah,
was. It was it was like I think it had to do with
the multi-device
multi-room volume control.
That's
you can't
what
do
it
that
was.
anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what it was. And then finally, just kind of a general increase in the updates that manufacturers are offering for their devices. OnePlus, of course, just recently announced 4 major OS updates, 5 years of regular security patches. Samsung is also offering that. Google, of course, a little bit less, 3 years major major OS updates, 5 years security. But overall, that's the right direction. Does news like that, Chet, from the inside? Because I know you're I'm assuming anyways, you're not involved in any of those negotiations, but are you happy to see kind of the landscape evolving for Android? Because this is another of those kind of like differentiators that people who want to say, well, Apple, iOS is better than Android. Oftentimes they point to the update aspect, and well, your Android's going to be out of date in 2 years because it's not going to get any more updates. And we're moving further and further away from that, and I think into better territory. What are your thoughts? Are people on the inside, how they feel about that?
Yeah, as you said, I'm like infinitely far away from these kind of decisions, but I am really happy to see them. Like, I think anything that makes the users happy is a good thing, and this is something that I think some people have found frustrating in the past. Like, that device is not going to be supported long enough. The hard part in the Android ecosystem is, okay, well, longer support windows means that's more of the user base that may be on, older devices or whatever. So what can you count on? In our ecosystem, it's a much different equation, right? Just because it's not controlled by us. We write the platform, manufacturers ship all the bits. So there are a lot of complexities involved in doing all this stuff, but I think it's a great thing for users.
Yeah, it'll be interesting as this becomes more and more normal. More manufacturers kind of promise these further out dates. 5 years security, 3 years or 4 years major OS. What are the trickle down effects of that as far as support, as far as app support and everything? And as hardware ages more, which in effect is going to happen as a result of something like this, people will potentially they'll hold on to their devices longer. What kind of challenges does that pose 3-4 years down the line? You're sure you're getting your updates, but is your phone running the way it used to? Are you able to run all the things that you want to run on it? Even though the OS is capable, is your hardware capable?
It's even more important, as I'm sure Wen would back up, for the developers writing those apps to actually be testing on things that are not the premium devices that just came out last month, but to be testing and running on devices that are representative of your users to make sure that you're seeing the real picture.
That is pretty darn important as well. You are right.
It is.
Well, speaking of hardware, the latest and greatest hardware, why don't we jump into hardware and we can talk about some of the latest and greatest hardware of this year. Let's do it. I mean, seriously, Ron.
It's like, I was going to say, like with Android 13 is the biggest news. You can't talk about hardware without talking about the Pixel 7, right?
Yeah, they kind of really go hand in hand, right? The latest Pixel, the latest version of Android, the way the cadence happens with Google. It's not quite same day and date. I feel like there was a Pixel release sometime in the last couple of years where it was the new version of Android and we're releasing the Pixel, and they were within like weeks of each other. Now it's like a couple of months, but still they really do go hand in hand. And I've got the Pixel 7 Pro. I'm just a Pixel fan. It's my phone of choice year after year. Anyone who watches this show already knows that. Are we all using Pixel? Well, actually, Chet, what phone are you using these days?
Ooh,
I want to know.
On the spot.
Good timing for that question. If you asked me a week ago, I would say that I was using a 6 Pro, and then my 7 arrived in the mail about 3 days ago.
Very nice. Did you opt for the 7 or the 7 Pro?
I opted for the 7. The reason was the form factor. The only thing I was not enjoying about the 6 Pro, it was wide enough so that when I needed to really reach my thumb over to the other side of the screen, maybe the phone wasn't going to stay in my hand. And so I like the form factor of the 7 being a little bit narrower to make that reach a little bit easier.
Yeah. I would agree. I love, and I've said this on the show before, I love having a telephoto camera, which you get on the Pro and you don't get on the non-Pro. If it wasn't for that, I'd probably opt for the Reg and not the Pro device, and get a little bit smaller device for. I
got to admit, I've been using the 7 regular and I love it, but as I was in LA, a week and a half ago, as I venture more into New York City, stuff like that, I'm feeling the battery in the 7. I found myself wishing I had the 7 Pro, as I'm noticing, I didn't change my network off. I'm staying on 5G, so I'm getting the little 5G UC thing. And when I'm out in the world, I just feel like the battery is going quicker than it would if I had the bigger battery in the Pro.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, that is definitely a consideration, right? Smaller device, probably smaller battery.
And I didn't feel it on the 6 regular, but remember I turned off 5G when it came out because there was that weird modem issue, and I never turned it back on, right? And so I guess I could try turning 5G off on this
phone. Do you really
need
5G? Do you
I
really?
I don't believe so, probably. I think 5G is a myth anyway. So
we've talked about this before.
It's a marketing myth. Come on.
But this was a big year for Google hardware. And I think next year, like it's going to be with what we know, and Google has already mentioned, the tablet coming up. Google has not mentioned any sort of foldable. But I mean, man,
it's got to be coming.
I mean, those leaks keep happening, and can we fully trust the leaks? Well, no, we can't, but we enjoy trusting the leaks, and sometimes they turn out to be accurate. So,
sure
if that comes to fruition, this year to next year could be some of Google's biggest years as far as hardware is concerned. I mean, their lineup this year was solid with the 7 and 7 Pro. They finally did the Pixel Buds Pro, so they got the noise canceling in those. I was using those earlier today. I love them. The Pixel Watch, I don't really wear a wearable, but I mean, it's a really nicely designed wearable. And finally, nice to get something like that from Google. We've been waiting a long time for that. And then, the 6A, of course, couldn't leave that out as well because, year after year, Google does great things with their mid-range offering, the A series, and the 6A is no different as far as that's concerned. And then so much to look forward to next year. So I think looking back, it's just been a great year for Google hardware.
I do notice though that we got the Pixel 7. You're talking about the the tablet and all that sort of stuff, and you mentioned the Pixel Watch came out, but it is this whole even though the Pixel Watch wasn't right for me, once that tablet comes out. We were talking earlier when we were talking about the book, Chet's book, now we have this ecosystem where every device you could be Pixel branded and you could live that Pixel lifestyle. And I think that's really next year will be the turning point, will be the first time ever that we've had that all come into alignment. And so I'm fascinated to see how it goes and the eventual foldable that we definitely will see. So
maybe not so much the Pixel book anymore, right? Not the Chromebook. Although I do have in here the framework. Chet, were you familiar at all? Did you hear about the framework? Obviously not a Google device. This was it's basically like a modular Chromebook as far as Chrome OS was concerned. It really, I don't know. I haven't used one, but everything that I hear about the framework is that it's a spectacular device. And not to mention, you don't see much modularity in the world of Chrome OS. And so it was kind of nice to kind of have that opportunity.
Nope. News to me.
No. Well, you should check it out. now that it seems like Google is not producing any more Chromebooks, which is too bad because I feel like they've done a really great job with their Chromebooks in the past. So everybody should check out Framework. Samsung hardware, of course.
Yes.
We know that you are a big time fan of the Fold.
I am. This has been really great year for me. I mean, it's been great for Samsung because, of course, they've released a ton of amazing hardware. Also, as usual, with the, of course, S22, S22 Ultra, but also coming out with the Z Fold 4, the Z Flip 4, the Galaxy Watch 5, and then their new buds as well. And this is the year that I became a Samsung user and really loved it, and also a foldable user as well. And I think it was a really great year for the foldable with the Flip and kind of being as popular as it is. And I forgot we covered one story where Samsung said there were so many millions of, foldable devices shipped, this year. It was kind of amazing. So yes, sorry, Dev fam, I have, betrayed us all by becoming a Samsung fan. As a dev, I'm still annoyed at Samsung quite often because, actually it's interesting because I actually didn't really get a daily driver with Android 13 on it because One UI 5 did not come out nearly close to when the rest of everyone using a Pixel or other Google device got, Android 13. But there's a lot of great things about Samsung hardware. And they really are driving this foldable revolution.
They're riding the foldable wave.
Yeah.
They're creating, I don't know. Are they creating the wave? They're just riding it really well.
Here they go. Wave.
Yeah, they're masterfully folding it well. Yeah.
Folding into.
Chet, what do you think of foldables in general as a form factor? As a designer,
I'm very curious. I basically have seen them from afar, and I was curious watching you use that how do you use the capabilities of the foldable? Because without playing with it, I think it's hard for me to see what content am I going to need the foldable for, or is it just like a thick phone? I think you need to be the user to understand how to incorporate it.
Yeah, I think any kind of content consumption, whether that's reading, whether that is media. I watch a lot of YouTube. I think most things, like even social media, like Instagram and stuff, I benefit from the larger screen. And I think that even normally I'm not the kind of person that does content. I would say content creation, that's not quite right. But even writing an email or, even texting at some point. I oftentimes, when I'm trying to tell my husband everything I need him to do, I want to open up my laptop, open up Signal and type in there. But I think that this becomes really a small, honestly, legitimately a portable phone, a portable computer rather, that fits in my pocket. Sort of fits in my pocket. I got lady pockets, so they don't quite fit. But I think that there's something about this that is a good bridge between a phone where it's really portable and can be with me to bring me information wherever I am, but also be wide enough where it feels comfortable. It feels comfy to consume media, to consume even text on it. And I think, if I have to take a call, I take a call. Sometimes I answer it like this, though, which is kind of awkward. But I think having the 2-in-1 is actually quite good. And the fact that the hardware is nice and has worked so far. We'll see how it does a year from now and how everything lasts. Because we did cover some stories about how the inner screen protector is not so good after about 8 months, but we'll see.
It doesn't matter though because in a year when Samsung shows off their next iteration of the Fold, they're going to give you such a great trade in for that device that you're going to be lured in.
I did take advantage of it, or maybe the passport if it's a real thing. Will get me back, because that was a thing. Not having a Pixel right away and having 13 come out and being a dev was a little weird.
Yeah, I bet.
A little weird.
A little weird.
But a little weird.
All right.
As is.
Well, I was going to say, what was also a little weird was our need to make puns and jokes around the company of nothing, or something is nothing and nothing is everything and yada yada. But Carl Pei made his return with the Nothing Company, and I would say had a good year. I mean, they got the phone out the door. So Nothing's Phone 1 was released, although it's not available in the US yet. But those stylish, trendy bird lovers in the UK and Europe can get the Nothing Phone 1 if you remember that marketing campaign to announce it with the LED lights and things like that. But I got to give Nothing credit that my hardware device of the year came later in the year when they released the Nothing Ear Stick, which is now my wireless earbuds of choice and one of the best purchases that I made all year.
Dang, that's high
like
praise.
I mentioned, I traveled this month. I brought them with me. They stayed charged. The case is awesome. Like everything about it sounds good. So Nothing really delivered some quality with these earbuds. So I would love to try pairing them with the Phone 1 when that's eventually available in the US. But for now, they work great with my Pixel 7. So my hardware of the year goes to Nothing.
Wow.
So,
that's
and you got me to purchase them. And by the way, I listened to Androids, an audiobook by Chet Haase, using my Nothing ear sticks the last couple of weeks. So
the more
they work great for that. But Ron, I don't know if you've noticed, but because, I mean, this is amazing, the way that the case kind of rolls over. But I don't know, Ron, if you have this problem, maybe this is a me problem. The one problem I'm having with this is that dust is getting in between, because this is a kind of roll.
Yeah.
I haven't.
Dust is okay. Then apparently I just confessed how dirty my house is, because I'm getting dust in between like the outside acrylic cover and then the inside like compartment that actually holds and charges the earpods. So my bad. Forget I said that. Wynn's house is perfectly clean and just not dusty at all.
Right on. And just to think, in March, nothing. We heard kind of the news that nothing was actually working on a smartphone, and then by the end of the year, we've got the phone, we've got the ear stick. And the news that they're working to release in the U.S. Soon. So I don't know if that they're going to bring the one to the U.S. or the next phone. But I think we also had the news that that Carl Pei even said, like, we're going to take our time on a follow-up phone. So you could be waiting a while for nothing.
I did want to add for when, if it helps, that does just sound like a lint failure, so maybe you can fix that.
Lint is a tool that we use when developing to let us know when we've kind of done things that are not recommended or so sorry. Explain the joke. Ruin it. But
no,
for the
thank you for explaining the joke. I just thought it was a funny joke, and then I realized there's actually some deeper meaning to it. So this is why we have a developer on the show, so she can break the cryptography of other developers.
For the other developers that you have on the show.
Exactly. And then real quick to round this out, the OnePlus 10 Pro, the OnePlus 10, the OnePlus 10T. Again, when I was putting this together, I was like, okay, well, we got to have OnePlus in there because we're used to having them in there. But, it's just, as we've talked about in the past, there was a lot of momentum behind OnePlus releases, or a lot of fire, let's say, behind OnePlus releases. And now I feel like that fire is lessening over time. And this year kind of felt the same way. It's not that the devices were bad, because they're not bad devices. They're actually really nice, but I don't know. There's just some magic. There's some excitement that is dissipating around the OnePlus brand right now, and I think that just comes from being a very successful phone, manufacturer that's in more places and doing, releasing a lot more different verticals and everything. So, I don't know. Take from that what you will. And then finally, I put this in here just because it came up on the show. I don't know how important. From a grand scale, it really is. But the Motorola MA1 adapter, which really ties in with the adapter that you had for bringing wireless Android Auto to your car, Ron, and just kind of seeing that thing become a little bit more consumer friendly, a little bit more of like a consumer product that you might find in a store as opposed to Kickstarter.
Yeah, not only that, but like the AA wireless, which I picked up off of Indiegogo, and then the Motorola MA1, but then like other versions of it cropped up. Like now there's a handful. Like you've got a ton of selection to bring wireless Android Auto to your car via a dongle that goes into the USB cable. Like so, it's really interesting to see how that emerged as a weird little vertical. Right?
Yeah, so. Totally. So there we go. Did I miss any major hardware that anyone's been excited about this year? I mean, I probably did, but maybe not for the folks on this panel. But if I did, and you're watching and listening, and you want to make sure it gets due credit, email us AAA@twit.tv, and then in the new year, we'll do all of the honorable mentions. So there you go. Hey, real quick, I want to first of all show off this sweatshirt. Because anyone who's in the know, and if you're watching the video version, you will notice that this is the Android Intelligence logo. Our good friend J.R. Raphael, who does our Android Intelligence tip of the week. He has another tip, but I just want to say thank you, J.R., for sending us all sweatshirts.
So generous. Thank you, JR.
Very nice.
You,
very comfortable.
Mine too.
That's right. Burke
Mine
got
is over there.
one
I
too.
can't reach it, but it's over. Burke got one. Wow.
Yeah, JR went for it. Anyways, JR has a tip here, and then we were going to get into the biggest app and developer news, but that happens after JR's tip. Take it away, JR.
Hey, so last week we talked about one of my favorite Android wallpaper discoveries of 2022, a clever little app called Tap It. Well, today I want to introduce you to another wallpaper app I stumbled onto this year, not too long ago. It's something that's quickly become one of my favorite all-around Android tools just in general. And it's a perfect complement to TWiT too, because it's the same kind of thing in a broad sense, but it really serves a very different purpose. It's got some pretty interesting twists too. The app is called Walpy, W-A-L-P-Y, Walpy, fun name to say. Well, TWiT works by automatically generating all sorts of interesting pattern-based wallpapers for your phone. Walpy lets you pick from a virtually endless supply of top-notch, really high-quality images to use as your phone's background. Now, 3 things in particular make Walpy stand out. Number 1, all of its wallpapers come from a site called Unsplash. If you aren't familiar with Unsplash yet, it's an absolutely awesome repository of really high quality images from photographers all around the world. No matter what style or sorts of visuals you prefer, you're definitely going to find tons of fantastic stuff that you love there. And new stuff's popping up constantly too, so you never run out of interesting options. Number 2, Walpy's got some super simple tools for customizing any image you find to make it look any way you want, right then and there while you're in the midst of setting it as your wallpaper. Personalized personalization. Man, doesn't get much better than that. And number 3, if you prefer the set it and forget it approach, Walpy's got a really simple way to switch out your wallpapers for you automatically at any interval you want and with whatever source of images you like best. The app really couldn't be much easier to use either. You just open it up and either browse through the latest or most popular images or search for any sort of theme you want. Beaches, squirrels, pickles, you name it. When you find something you like, you tap it, and from there, you can set it as your wallpaper by tapping the circular wallpaper icon in the lower right corner of the screen. You can change its positioning by swiping your finger to the left or right on the actual image. And you can adjust the photo's brightness, contrast, even its coloring by tapping the little control panel icon over in the lower left corner of the screen. That same area also has tools for adding a blur or vignette effect onto the image if you really want to get fancy. And if you tap the little heart icon, Walpy marks it as a favorite. Then within the app's main settings, you can activate the auto change wallpapers option and tell it to automatically swap out your wallpaper to something new from your favorites every few hours, every couple days, whatever you want. You can also take a walk on the wild side and let Walpy pick a random image with every refresh if you're feeling especially adventurous. Oh, and one more thing, you can load your own personal photos into Walpy too, and then use its tools to fine-tune them into perfect wallpaper-ready additions for your rotation. Told you this thing was awesome, didn't I? And best of all, Walpy is completely free with an optional $2 upgrade if you want some extra in-app features. No eyebrow-raising permissions, no access to personal data, nothing like that. We'll toss a link to the app's Play Store page into the show notes for you. And remember, you can get new tips and tools like this straight from me in your inbox every week with my Android Intelligence newsletter. 3 new things to try every Friday, and it's completely free for you. Just head over to androidintel.net/twit to get in on the action. That site again is androidintel.net/twit. Hey, I hope you have a wonderful winter break, whatever holiday or holidays you might be celebrating. It's been an absolute blast hanging out with y'all here over these past months. Can't wait to do it more in 2023. I'll see you soon.
Thank you, JR. And be sure to charge up that shirt because it's kind of distracting. It's low on battery and it's just hard for me to see that. Not want to like plug your shirt in or something. JR is awesome. There it is. Yep. Yeah, he's always wearing like a really cool like new shirt.
He's got a good Android wardrobe.
Yeah, he's got a nice rotation.
Sure. Yeah,
I've noticed. Yep. Yeah. Thank you, JR. AndroidIntelligence.net. All right. And finally, we're going to round things out with some of the biggest developer news and kind of like tools news, that sort of thing, and biggest apps. Let's jump in. Oh, yeah. There we go. Yeah, we'll start with you, Huyen, and we'll start with the developer-y stuff.
I love it, and I really have loved being here. This is, I think, we're running almost my first full year being here with y'all as a host of all the Android. Yeah, and I love being able to talk about stuff that I know makes me excited as a dev. And one of those things, get your drinks ready, is Compose.
No way. No.
No way. I know, very surprising that one of my biggest news bits of the year have to do with Compose. And of course, this year was not just a Compose year, but it was also a form factors year. We talked about the hardware of both the watch, the upcoming large screens, and the phones themselves. Well, I think some of the big things is, again, how much Compose is not just kind of affecting the way that devs build phone apps, but how it will affect how we build Android TV apps, because of course Material Design 3 and Compose are coming to Android TV, as well as already coming to Wear OS. So you can build your watch phones. You can build your watch apps and your TV apps now with Compose, and hopefully bring that productivity and that power and that modern Android developmentness to all those different form factors. And the other thing that I probably say or talk about as much as Jetpack Compose is Kotlin. And of course, for those of us who remember probably one of your top three is one of my top three greatest announcements of all time at Google I/O, had an anniversary this year. This year had marked the 5th anniversary of Kotlin becoming a first-party supported language on Android. Again, I don't think any of us devs will forget when Steph Cuthbert was announcing that we get to use Kotlin for Android development, and it has become the recommended language for Android. And yeah, just so many good things to celebrate. Kotlin, Compose, other things that start with a C sound. I don't know, Chet, looking back, do you think Kotlin has kind of, I don't know, I mean, it feels kind of like an obvious question, but I don't know, has the Android team been excited, and I think, and has their productivity been increased as much as the rest of us by Kotlin in the last 5 years?
Yeah, everyone's very excited about it because, like, when you use it and get used to it, it's a little bit of change, and you sort of take a little bit to ramp up into all of its idiomatic wonderfulness. Everyone's really excited about it. The people that benefit from it most are the people who are developing not on the platform. So the people writing Android Studio code, like actually making Android Studio work. That is, I think all that new code is being done in Kotlin, as well as Android X. A lot of the stuff going into Android X, like the libraries I'm working on there, are usually in Kotlin code these days. So we get to take advantage of it. On the platform side, not so much. Because those are Java APIs. We're not about to, reboot and refactor that and require the Kotlin runtime to be running for core platform stuff at this point. So they're still writing Java code, or even below that, some native code to make all the bits in the OS work. But everyone, I think, appreciates what it's doing for developers, whether they're internal developers working on it or external developers that are more productive and frankly more excited. It's fun to do new things as an engineer. It's one of the fun things about the job is that you get to learn and use new things and new patterns and new ways of doing things. And I think that's a obvious element of this that's kind of important. Like, hey, here's a new shiny. Let's see how this works and how we can do our stuff faster and more efficiently and more enjoyably.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was such a moment 5 years ago. I was at Google I/O in the audience when that announcement happened. And, admittedly, like I said earlier, and I've said many times on this show, like, I am not a developer. There are a lot of things about development that, I'm kind of like along for the ride, and I love hearing about it. But, it takes me a while to kind of get to an understanding on certain things. And Kotlin, that just... it was palpable how excited people were. And to hear you describe it just now as like one of three, most amazing moments at Google I/O just speaks to how I guess the question that comes to me is, on the inside at Google, did you all have an idea that everyone would be so damn excited by that news as they were, or was that at all a surprise? Like, oh man, they really liked that we were support. Yeah, I mean that was insanity.
I mean, I think we all knew by that point that developers were pretty excited about it. I think the surprise was to see emotion coming from engineers at all in any context ever. we're a fairly, sort of stoic bunch in general. So yeah, to see people actually that visibly excited, was maybe a bit of a surprise.
Then it's a really, really big thing if that's happening. Yeah. Well, who's excited about? No, maybe excited is the wrong word. Who's disappointed? Super sad that Hangouts is no longer. Remember, this is the year officially. I feel like this was like was it a 2-year thing? Was it 2 years where we're like, all right, Hangouts is dying. Hangouts is going away. And you know what? As of November, gone for good, shut down. I think November 1st, the web app was the final remnant. And so if anyone was still holding on for dear life to Hangouts because they loved it so much, I was a big fan of Hangouts, but I feel like I moved on at this point, so I can accept.
Well, I feel like this has got to be a cluster of a bunch of like internal apps. So you have Hangouts shuts down. You also have they merged Meet and Duo into the singular voice and video call app, right? So so you had that happen.
Mullet, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then my favorite of them all was that GPay then became Google Wallet, kind of as the carousel of life with Android continues. But I gotta admit, I use Google Wallet every day and I love it. Like I mentioned, I was traveling this month. I was in LA, and every boarding pass I threw in my Google Wallet. It was there and ready to go. Scan when I got on the plane. Like it worked really nicely. My loyalty cards, all that sort of stuff. Like I do like what Google Wallet has become. It's just been a circuitous journey through names.
It has. And we're here for good, right? Like you can tell us with absolute certainty, Chet, that 10 years from now, Google Wallet, of course, I'm not going to ask you that. But holy moly, it has been a roller coaster with Google Wallet. And you're right. I mean, I totally agree. It's a wonderful app. I love where it's gotten to. But you can't help but chuckle a little bit when the name kind of goes back and forth the way it has. It feels familiar enough that we can laugh at it. When did you want to do Passkeys? Are you excited about Passkeys?
I love Passkeys. Yeah. So this year, the feature came to us when we just talked about this last week, where, Passkeys, which are kind of like the FIDO Alliance protocol for doing secure authentication without insecure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, trying to get your parents on password manager and needing passwords anymore. And, we talked about it quite a bit and about how, all the kind of big players in the techscape, Microsoft, Google, Apple, are all kind of moving towards this passwordless future of using passkeys and then integrating that with, things that we use, nowadays for kind of authenticating ourselves with, biometrics and even like nearby and Bluetooth, and basically replacing all of the need for password managers and, again, all of that is going away with Passkeys. And we're getting a taste of it already with Chrome. And I actually was kind of surprised to see it like show up in Chrome last week. That was a real treat. So yeah, it just seems like the start of a really good, much more secure future rather, and honestly, like an even more convenient one. I think it's kind of hard to it's kind of hard sometimes to describe how the process works because we can't actually go through the flow too often. I know that we've talked about Passkeys often about how it works and the tech behind it, but really it's kind of an interesting advancement where it's meant to be both safer and easier. You don't even have to like worry about password managers anymore. It's literally just authenticating yourself to a central, authentication authority, whether that's Microsoft, whether that's Google, whether that's Apple, and letting that service do the creation and exchange of passkeys. And that it's, and especially in the world that we have now where everything's synced, it's just great. And the future is here. So we got passkeys.
Yay.
And maybe next year it'll start rolling out. We already talked about 1Password having it. So yeah, next year you're the passkey. Oh, that's not as zippy as other things, but yeah.
Well, I think it's zippy. I'm down for it.
You're the passkey?
You're the passkey. Let's make shirts.
I'm passkeyed up.
Like stickers. Nice. I'm passkeyed up. I like that. That's the motto. Chet just coined it.
And then finally, Android on Windows. Just really quick, because this was the year that Amazon was bringing its own app store, the Amazon App Store, to Windows 11, so that you could run Android apps on a Windows PC. And then Google, of course, doing the same thing with Google Play Games. They opened up their beta outside of the U.S. so that we're seeing more and more of this. This movement toward, again, kind of touching on Google's, I think, grander vision of Android in all places. It might not be running Android on Windows 11, but you could certainly get, a lot of the games and the apps and stuff through these two initiatives as they're developed out further on Windows. And what will that mean, to be able to get at these apps on a Windows PC? And what does that mean for developers? The bottom line for developers. So I'm not sure we have the answers to any of that right now, but it's interesting to see. And yeah.
Does that make the desktop the next big platform then?
Oof, I don't know. The desktop, it's really just in an experimental stage right now. So it's too early to predict that the desktop's going to be important in the future, but it could happen. Anything could happen, Chet. But yeah. So we have reached the end. I'm sure we've missed plenty of news that has happened this past year. It was hard to compile a list of literally everything, and we don't have the time to list everything, but I think we did an all right job. And I know that we brought a pretty awesome episode because we had you on, Chet, and we still have you on until the end of this episode, but we really thank you so much for giving us a couple hours of your night here right before the holidays to talk about your book, to talk about your time, your history at Google, a topic that I know the three of us are infinitely fascinated by, and definitely the people who follow this show really love and appreciate any of that insight as well. So thank you so much for hopping on with us today. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me on here. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. I should point out too, I wasn't even there at the time. I was writing about the history before I got there because that to me was the fascinating story of how it started.
Totally right.
That's awesome.
Your time at Google started probably right about the end of the book, essentially, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's a good way to learn. It's a good way to learn about everything that came before you. And everybody should read the fruits of Chet's labor by checking out his book. The title, once again, Androids: The Team That Built the Android Operating System. Chet, thank you, and have a wonderful holiday. And yeah, if people want to kind of follow you, I know that we have your Mastodon ID on your lower third. Is that where you prefer people to kind of find you?
That is the new thing. I am also found on a bird site. I also tend to write tech and as well as occasional comedy articles on Medium.
Yeah,
those are kind of the three places to find me.
Right on. Well, thank you, Chet. It's been a pleasure, and have a wonderful holiday. Thank you again.
Thanks,
Ron, what do you want to leave people with?
Yeah, well, just thank everybody for another great year of All About Android. Again, it's the highlight of my week and hopefully the highlight of everyone else's, all of our listeners and viewers and everything like that. I want to thank everybody, and Burke and Jason and Victor and Huyen and Flo and Michelle, everybody, the whole team. It's been such a great year. So much fun. But if you need more to listen to in your holiday break, tune in next week when we talk about the best moments of the show. But if you want to hear what me and some of my buddies liked in the world of movies and TV and books and comics and things like that, head over to ifanboy.com where we posted the all media, what we call our all media year-end roundup, where we talked about all of our favorite stuff through the year. It's a whopper, almost 3-hour long episode where we talk about all of our favorites. So definitely check it out. And if you haven't watched The Bear on Hulu, go watch that. The best TV show of the year. So,
interesting.
And everybody have a great holidays.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Ron. You have a great holiday as well.
Yep.
What about you, Win?
Yes, I'm an Android dev, and I am extremely thankful to be here on All About Android. I've been a longtime listener, and I really appreciate y'all welcoming me, and also dealing with the sad fact that I am indeed an engineer trying to communicate with y'all every week to the best of my ability, even despite being an engineer. So I really appreciate that. And I genuinely love Android very much as a consumer and as a dev. So getting to talk about the other side of things every week has been totally awesome. And then to sometimes get to rant at you for a inordinate amount of time about dev stuff is also really freaking awesome. And you can more listen to me rant about dev stuff in a more kind of calm and technical way through my technical talks, which you can find at randomlytyping.com. And you can find me at places at Queen Code Monkey. I'm currently at Queen Code Monkey at Queen Code Monkey at Mastodon.social. But type Queen Code Monkey in places and maybe you'll find me. And yeah, Thank you, everyone, for a great year.
Thank you, Wen. It's been a pleasure having you on this year and into the future. Thank you to J.R. Raphael for his weekly app recommendations and everything. Have a wonderful holiday, J.R. And again, thank you for the sweatshirt. Thank you to Burke behind the scenes, pushing buttons, pointing at me when I said his name. That was good. Every once in a while, I hear him grunt when things don't go well. That's a little perk that I get when I'm here in the studio. Big thanks to Victor, who edits this show so that you, dear listener and viewer, can watch or listen to this show each and every week. Without Victor, you would not get this episode. So thank you, Victor. You can find me at Jason Howell. You can find me at twit.social/@JasonHowell. If you want to find me on Mastodon, I've been a little bit more active there in recent days, or recent weeks, rather. Don't forget, we are close to the end of the year, which means we're close to the holidays, just a couple of days away. Club TWiT would make a really fantastic gift for the tech fan in your life. twit.tv/Club TWiT, ad-free subscription tier for all of our shows, so no ads. You get exclusive TWiT Plus podcast content, like pre-post show roll, hands on Mac, hands on Windows. We got a bunch of extra shows that only go out to the club, and then a members-only Discord. All of that for just $7 a month. Leo likes to point out that's $1 less than a blue check. So check it out for yourself. $84 per year. twit.tv/Club TWiT. As for this show, twit.tv/AAA. We do this show every Tuesday, though next week we are not going to be doing a live show. You will get the best of in your feed. So we've already recorded that. Sorry to spoil the magic, but you're going to get it next Tuesday, so you aren't going to miss an episode. We'll be back the following week with a new live episode. So twit.tv/AAA to subscribe so you don't miss that. Thank you. We appreciate you. And you just have yourselves a wonderful holiday. And we will see you in a couple of weeks when we're back in real time. Thank you. We'll see you next time on All About Android. Bye, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy holidays.
Hey there, I'm Micah Sargent. Look, as a geek myself, I feel it's only fair if I admit something. We can be kind of hard to shop for. So what do you get for that geek in your life who has everything already? Well, a Club TWiT gift subscription, of course. TWiT podcasts keep them informed and entertained with the most relevant tech news podcasts available. With a Club TWiT subscription, they're going to get access to all of our podcasts ad-free, exclusive outtakes, behind the scenes and special content, and I love this, exclusive shows like my own Hands on Mac and Hands on Windows from Paul Thurrott, as well as the Untitled Linux Show. So purchase your geek's gift at twit.tv/Club TWiT, and they will thank you every day.